The promise was for a new life. A husband, a home, a future carved from the raw, unforgiving land of the American West. For Astra Bishop, fleeing a past she prayed would stay buried, the letters from Tintillon, from Caleb Thornton, were a lifeline. But when her stagecoach finally crested the last rise overlooking Redemption Creek, the only welcome was a desolate wind whistling through a half-built cabin. The man who had promised her everything was gone, and in the suffocating silence of his abandoned home, she found something he'd left behind, a wailing, helpless, newborn baby. The dust was a living thing. It coated Astra Bishop's tongue, settled in the fine lines around her eyes, and worked its way into the very weave of her dark, serge traveling suit, a garment wholly unsuited for the relentless glare of the Montana Territory. For 3 days, the stagecoach had been her world, a cramped, lurching box rattling across an endless expanse of bleached grass and bruised purple mountains that seemed to retreat with every mile gained. Inside, she clutched her worn reticule, the crisp edges of Caleb Thornton's letters, a tangible link to the future she had purchased for the price of a train ticket and all the courage she possessed. His words had been the anchor in the storm of her life in Philadelphia. After the shame of her father's financial ruin and subsequent death, Astra, a woman of 26, found herself adrift in a society that had once revered her family. The whispers, the pitying glances, the offers of charity that felt more like chains they were suffocating. Caleb's advertisement in the Matrimonial Messenger was a gasp of fresh air. He wrote of his 160-acre homestead, of building a life with his own 2 hands, of a desire for a partner, not a servant. His penmanship was steady, his prose simple and earnest. He sent a daguerreotype, a man with kind eyes, a square jaw, and a slightly shy smile, his hair unruly from the wind. He was not handsome in the refined way of the men she'd once known, but his face radiated a sincerity that mattered more. Redemption Creek. The driver, a grizzled man named Hank, whose vocabulary seemed limited to grunts and geographical markers, announced. Astra leaned to peer out the window. The creek was a muddy trickle bisecting a single dusty street. On either side stood a dozen or so raw lumber buildings, a general store, a saloon with swinging doors that pulsed with discordant piano music. Even in the mid-afternoon, a blacksmith's forge sending up plumes of acrid smoke, and a sheriff's office with a faded hand-painted sign. It was less a town and more a temporary argument against the vastness of the wilderness. It was stark, and for a fleeting, terrifying moment, her resolve faltered. "You the one for Thornton?" Hank asked, pulling the weary horses to a halt in front of what passed for a livery stable. "I am," Astra said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Miss Astra Bishop. His place is a mile north of town. Can't miss it. Only spread in that direction." Hank began unstrapping her trunk from the back of the coach. "Funny thing, though. Ain't seen Caleb in town for the better part of 2 weeks. A knot of ice formed in Astra's stomach. 2 weeks, did he say he was traveling? Hank shrugged his shoulders, a testament to a life of not concerning himself with the affairs of others. Didn't say nothing to me, just stopped coming in for supplies. Could be he's out hunting. Could be 100 things. He spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust. Man wants to be left alone out here. Folks generally oblige. He pointed. Follow that track. Sun'll be setting in a couple of hours. Like I said, can't miss it. Her trunk containing all her worldly possessions was deposited in the dust with a thud that echoed the sinking of her heart. The stagecoach rumbled away, leaving her in a cloud of grit and profound silence, broken only by the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. A mile. She squared her shoulders. Caleb was a homesteader. He was likely busy, consumed with the work he had described so vividly in his letters. He was preparing their home. The thought was a fragile shield against the encroaching anxiety. Leaving her trunk at the livery to be collected later, she began the walk, her city boots ill-suited for the rutted track. The sun beat down and the promised mountains remained stubbornly distant. The landscape was beautiful in a brutal, untamed way, but it offered no comfort. It felt ancient and indifferent to the small dramas of human hearts. Just as Hank had predicted, she saw it after a 20-minute walk, a small cabin nestled near a cluster of cottonwood trees that marked a slightly more vigorous section of the creek. It was unfinished. The main structure was built, but the porch was missing its roof, and stacks of fresh-cut lumber lay nearby, silvering in the sun. No smoke curled from the stone chimney. No horse stood in the small fenced corral. The silence here was different from the silence of the open prairie. It was a weighted silence full of expectation and absence. Caleb. She called out, her voice thin against the immensity of the sky. Caleb, it's Astra Bishop. Only the wind answered, rustling the leaves of the cottonwoods. Hesitantly, she approached the cabin. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking rhythmically on its leather hinges. A sense of dread, cold and sharp, pierced through her apprehension. She pushed the door open. The interior was a single room, neat but Spartan. A sturdy table and 2 chairs stood in the center. A cast-iron stove was cold in the corner. Shelves on the wall held a few tins of food, a sack of flour, and a small collection of books. On the far side was a bed, the quilt on it pulled tight, as if its owner had just made it, before stepping out for a moment. Everything was in order, yet it felt profoundly wrong. It was the home of a man who intended to return any minute, but who had failed to do so for 14 days. And then she heard it. It was not the wind. It was a sound so out of place, so fundamentally incongruous with the desolation around her, that she thought she was imagining it. A faint, fretful whimper. It came from the direction of the bed. Astra's breath caught in her throat. She took a slow step forward, then another, her boots unnaturally loud on the rough planked floor. She peered around the edge of the bed frame. There, on a pile of clean but worn blankets, tucked into a wooden crate, lay a baby. Astra gasped, stumbling back a step. The infant couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. It was wrapped in a simple cotton cloth, its tiny face red and puckered with distress. Its small fists flailed weakly, and the whimper grew into a thin, reedy cry, a sound of pure, helpless misery. For a long moment, Astra could not move, could not breathe. Her mind, already reeling from Caleb's absence, refused to process the scene. A baby. An abandoned baby. Here, in Caleb's home. Her first instinct was raw panic. This was not her concern. This was a nightmare from which she needed to wake. She should turn, walk back to the town, find the sheriff, and report the missing man and the foundling. It was the sensible, logical thing to do. But the baby's cry sliced through her paralysis. It was a sound that bypassed reason and struck at some primal, unawakened core of her being. She looked at the tiny, desperate creature, and the world narrowed to that single, impossible reality. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. The temperature was already dropping. To leave the child here, even to go for help, felt like an act of unspeakable cruelty. The town was a mile away. It would be dark before she returned. Slowly, as if in a trance, she knelt beside the crate. The baby's dark, unfocused eyes blinked open. It had a dusting of fine black hair on its head. There was no note, no explanation. Just a child left in an empty house. Caleb's child. The thought was a painful betrayal. Had he lied? Was he already a father, a husband to another? Had he lured her all this way on a false promise, only to flee from a life that had become too complicated? The questions swirled, each one more painful than the last. But the questions could wait. The baby could not. Its cry was weaker now, tinged with exhaustion. With trembling hands, Astra reached down and gathered the small, warm bundle into her arms. The infant was shockingly light. It squirmed for a moment, then feeling the heat of her body, settled against her chest, its cries softening to a series of hiccuping whimpers. Holding the child, a strange and powerful sense of possession washed over Astra. The desolation of the cabin, the crushing disappointment, the terror of her situation. It all receded, replaced by a fierce, protective resolve. She looked down at the small face, at the rosebud mouth that worked silently, seeking sustenance. In that moment, standing in the twilight of a stranger's home, with a stranger's child in her arms, Astra Bishop made a decision. It was not born of logic or planning, but of a profound and undeniable human imperative. She would not abandon this baby. Whatever had happened here, whatever secrets this place held tonight, this child was her responsibility. She was no longer just Astra Bishop, the spurned mail-order bride. She was the only thing standing between this infant and the vast, indifferent wilderness. She was, for now, its mother. The first night was a long, dark corridor of fear and fumbling instinct. Astra found a can of sweetened condensed milk on the shelf, and after a frantic search, a small, clean medicine bottle. Recalling how her own mother had cared for a neighbor's ailing infant, she diluted the thick, sugary milk with boiled water, cooled it, and painstakingly dripped it into the baby's mouth. The child, ravenous, suckled weakly at the glass tip. It was a messy, imperfect process, but it was life. She changed the infant's soiled wrappings using strips torn from one of Caleb's spare shirts she found in a trunk at the foot of the bed. As she worked, she examined the child more closely. It was a girl, a tiny, perfectly formed girl. On the back of her neck, just below the hairline, was a small, crescent moon-shaped birthmark. It was the only distinguishing feature on this anonymous soul. Sleep came in brief, anxious snatches. Astra sat in the cabin's only rocking chair, the baby cradled in her arms, a shotgun she'd found propped against the wall by the door, her only comfort. Every creak of the wood, every hoot of a distant owl sent a jolt of adrenaline through her. Was that Caleb returning? Or something worse? By dawn, exhaustion had settled deep into her bones, but beneath it lay a bedrock of resolve. She had to go to town. She needed proper milk nappies and answers. Most of all, she needed to find the sheriff. Wrapping the baby securely in a heavy wool blanket, Astra stepped out into the crisp morning air. The world felt different now. The landscape was no longer just a backdrop. It was a presence, a force to be reckoned with. The mile-long walk to Redemption Creek felt twice as far as the day before, her arms aching from the unfamiliar weight of the child. As she entered the main street, the town was coming to life. A few cowhands loitered outside the saloon, their gazes lingering on her with open curiosity. A woman shaking a rug out of a second-story window paused to stare. Astra felt a blush of heat creep up her neck. She was a stranger, a woman alone carrying a baby. The story the townspeople would invent for themselves would be far more scandalous than the truth. Her first stop was the building marked Sheriff. The door was open. Inside, a man sat with his boots propped on a cluttered desk, a tin mug of coffee in his hand. He was younger than she expected, perhaps in his early 30s, with a lean, weathered face and calm, perceptive blue eyes. A silver star was pinned to his leather vest. He brought his boots to the floor with a thud as she entered. "Ma'am, are you the sheriff?" Astra asked, her voice quiet but firm. "Sheriff Brody, at your service." His eyes flicked from her face to the bundle in her arms and back again. A question hung in the air unspoken. "My name is Astra Bishop. I was supposed to marry Mr. Caleb Thornton." Brody's expression didn't change, but a flicker of something recognition, perhaps pity, crossed his face. "Thornton's mail-order bride. We heard you were coming in on yesterday's stage." "He wasn't there," Astra said, the words coming out in a rush. The cabin was empty. "His things are all there, but he's gone. A man at the livery said no one has seen him in 2 weeks. The sheriff listened, his gaze steady. "That's true. Figured he was busy on his claim. He's a quiet man, keeps to himself." He gestured to the child. "And the baby." Here it was, the moment of judgment. She was there, in the cabin, alone. Sheriff Brody's eyebrows shot up. He stood his full height, revealing a man built of wiry strength. Alone. Left in a crate, I'd wager. He said it not as a question, but a statement. Astra stared at him, stunned. "How did you know?" "Because it ain't the first time a man in these parts has found himself with a problem he couldn't solve." Brody said, his voice laced with a weary cynicism. He walked around the desk, his gaze softening as he looked at the sleeping infant. "Any note? Anything to say who she is?" "Nothing. Just her." "Damn fool Caleb," the sheriff muttered under his breath. He looked back at Astra. "What do you aim to do, Miss Bishop?" "I need to report him missing. And I need supplies for the baby. Reporting him missing is easy enough. We'll form a search party, ride out to his claim, ask around. But that's the simple part." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The hard part is the child. We don't have an orphanage. Nearest one is in Helena, a week's ride from here. A baby that small. It's a hard journey." The unspoken implication hung between them. The journey was one the child might not survive. "What are you saying?" Astra asked, her heart sinking. "I'm saying you have a choice. We can try to find a family in town to take her in. Or you can head back east on the next stage and leave this whole sorry business behind you. No one would blame you. Leave her." The image of the train ticket office in Philadelphia. The memory of her own helplessness flashed through her mind. She had come here to build a life, not to run from one. And this child was already a part of it. "I am not leaving her, Astra," said her voice, ringing with a certainty that surprised even herself. "And I will not hand her over to just anyone. Until Caleb is found, or the child's mother, I will care for her." Sheriff Brody studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "You're a stubborn woman, Miss Bishop. I am a practical woman, Sheriff. A baby needs care. I am here. It is practical." A slow smile touched his lips. "All right, Miss Practical. Let's get you to the general store. Martha Higgins will get you sorted. But be warned, in a town this small, news travels faster than a prairie fire. You're about to become the subject of a great deal of speculation." He was right. As they walked the short distance to Higgins' general store, Astra felt the weight of a dozen pairs of eyes. Whispers followed them like ghosts. The store was a cluttered wonderland of scents and textures, coffee beans and cured bacon, new leather and lye soap. A stout woman with iron-grey hair, pulled into a severe bun, and a surprisingly kind face, stood behind the counter. "Martha, this is Miss Astra Bishop, Sheriff Brody," said by way of introduction. "She'll be staying out at the Thornton place for a spell. She's in need of some supplies. For the baby." Martha Higgins' eyes widened as she took in the scene. She wiped her hands on her apron and came around the counter, her gaze fixed on the infant. Saints alive. Where did that come from? "Found her," Brody said succinctly. "Out at Caleb's." The story spilled out again this time, under Martha's sharp, questioning gaze. The woman clicked her tongue in disapproval. "Caleb Thornton. I always said there was something flighty about that man. Too quiet. Still waters run deep and often muddy." She peered at the baby. "Well, no use crying over spilled milk or vanished men. Let's see what we need." Martha was a whirlwind of efficiency. She found tins of Eagle brand milk cheesecloth for nappies and a bar of unscented soap. She gave Astra a running commentary on the failings of the men in Redemption Creek, the harshness of the winters, and the proper way to soothe colic. While she was brusque, there was an undercurrent of kindness to her that Astra found comforting. As Martha was wrapping a soft flannel blanket, a man entered the store. He was tall and dressed in clothes that were a shade too fine for the dusty town, a tailored coat, polished boots, and a clean Stetson. He had Caleb's square jaw and unruly hair, but his eyes were different. Where Caleb's were kind, this man's were cold and assessing like a banker, calculating a debt. "Sheriff," the man said, his voice a low drawl. He nodded at Brody, his eyes sliding over Astra and the baby with a flicker of distaste. Silas Brody acknowledged. "You've heard, I take it." "The whole town's heard the man," Silas replied. "My brother has vanished, and a woman claiming to be his fiancée has appeared with a babe in arms. It's quite the scandal." He looked directly at Astra, his lips curling into a semblance of a smile. "Silas Thornton, Caleb's older brother. I can't say he ever mentioned you." The implication was clear. She was a liar, an opportunist. Astra felt her spine stiffen. "He mentioned you," she said, coolly. "He said you managed the family's business interests back east." "I did, until I came out here to check on my brother's investment." His gaze swept the room again, as if appraising its contents. "It seems I've arrived just in time to clean up a mess." He lowered his voice, taking a step closer. "Miss Bishop, you must understand your position. You have no legal claim to my brother's property. The homestead is Thornton land. Now that he is absent, it falls to me. I have his letters." Astra countered, her hand instinctively tightening on the baby. "He asked me to come here to be his wife." "Letters." Silas chuckled a dry, unpleasant sound. "A lonely man's fancies. They won't stand up in any court. I am prepared to be reasonable, however. I will pay for your ticket back to wherever you came from. A gesture of goodwill for your trouble." "And the child?" Sheriff Brody interjected, his voice flat. Silas waved a dismissive hand. "The child is not my concern. A stray found on his property. It's the county's problem. Or hers if she's so attached to it." The casual cruelty of his words solidified Astra's resolve into something as hard and sharp as obsidian. This man, Caleb's own brother, would see this innocent child cast aside without a second thought. "The property may be Thornton land," Astra said, her voice trembling with a fury she hadn't known she possessed. "But this child is in my care, and I am not leaving. I will stay at the cabin until Caleb returns." Silas's cold eyes narrowed. "That is unwise, Miss Bishop. This is a hard country for a woman alone, especially one with baggage." "I'll take my chances," she retorted. A tense silence filled the store. Martha Higgins watched from behind the counter, her arms crossed. Sheriff Brody stood impassively, his hand resting near the butt of his pistol. Silas held her gaze for another moment, then let out a short, sharp sigh. "Have it your way. But when you find you can't manage, don't come crying to me." He tipped his hat with mocking courtesy and strode out of the store. The bell on the door jingled, leaving a vibrating silence in his wake. "You've made an enemy there, girl," Martha said, her voice softer now. "It would seem so," Astra whispered, looking down at the sleeping child in her arms. "What will you call her?" Martha asked, changing the subject. Astra hadn't even considered it. The baby had been the baby, a problem to be solved. But now, after the confrontation with Silas, she was something more. She was a symbol of defiance, a reason to stand her ground. She needed a name, not a placeholder, but a promise. Grace Astra said the name coming to her unbidden. "I'll call her Grace, because in this God-forsaken place, abandoned by the man who had promised her a future and threatened by the one who wanted to erase it, a little Grace was the only thing she had left." The days that followed settled into a routine of stark survival. Astra's life, once measured by social calls and literary society meetings, was now marked by the rising and setting of the sun, the mixing of milk, the washing of nappies in the creek, and the constant gnawing uncertainty of her future. The cabin, once a symbol of Caleb's betrayal, slowly became her fortress. She learned the quirks of the cast-iron stove, the way the floorboards creaked in the night, the particular slant of morning light that fell across Grace's makeshift cradle. Sheriff Brody, true to his word, had organized a search. A posse of 5 men, including himself, rode out to the low, rolling hills where Caleb had staked his mining claim. They returned 2 days later, empty-handed and grim-faced, no sign of him. Brody told her, standing on her threshold, his hat in his hands. His camp was there. A pickaxe, a shovel, a few empty tins. Looked just like he'd walked away from it 5 minutes ago. We searched the whole area, shouted ourselves hoarse. It's like he just vanished off the face of the earth. And Silas Astra asked, rocking a fussy Grace in her arms. "He came with us, made a good show of looking worried." Brody said, his tone suggesting he hadn't been convinced. Asked a lot of questions about the claim's boundaries. Seemed more interested in the property line than his own brother. The news, while not unexpected, landed like a stone. The faint hope that Caleb had simply been injured or lost, that he would come riding over the rise with a sheepish grin, finally died. She was truly on her own. Her funds were dwindling. The money Silas had offered for her return ticket, an offer she had rejected with righteous indignation, now seemed like a lifeline she had foolishly cut. To stave off the encroaching panic, Astra threw herself into work. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom. She tended to the small vegetable patch Caleb had started coaxing new life from the dry soil. and she began to go through his belongings, searching for any clue, any explanation for his disappearance. It was in the bottom of his trunk beneath his spare clothes and a well-thumbed copy of Walden that she found them a small locked wooden box and a bundle of letters tied with twine. They were not her letters. The handwriting was feminine, a graceful looping script that was somehow familiar. She untied the twine with trembling fingers. The letters were from a woman named Nyara. They were not love letters in the traditional sense, but they were intimate, full of shared observations about the land, the stars, and the struggles of living between two worlds. Nyara wrote of her people the Crow, and of the suspicion she faced from her own tribe for her friendship with a white man. She wrote of Caleb's kindness, his respect for her knowledge of the land, and the way he listened, truly listened when she spoke. The last letter was dated a month ago. Caleb, it read. The men who watch from the ridge are not prospectors. Their eyes are hard. They do not look at the rock. They look at you. Silas's questions are not born of brotherly concern. Be careful. The earth here holds more than just stone, and greed is a powerful spirit. Astra's blood ran cold. The men who watch from the ridge. Silas's questions. This was no simple disappearance. Caleb had been in danger. He had known it, and it was tied somehow to his claim. She turned her attention to the locked box. It was small, made of dark wood, with simple iron fittings. Using the tip of a fireplace poker, she pried the lock open. Inside, nestled on a bed of dried herbs, lay two objects. The first was a small, crudely drawn map. It showed the area of Caleb's claim with the creek and several rock formations sketched in for reference. But in one corner of the claim, a small X was marked next to a drawing of a lightning-scarred pine tree. Beside the X, Caleb had written a single word, Nodina. The second object was a small leather pouch. Astra emptied its contents into her palm. Out fell a single beautiful piece of beadwork, a tiny, intricately stitched moccasin, no bigger than her thumb, decorated with a crescent moon pattern in brilliant blue and white beads. Astra stared at the tiny moccasin, her heart pounding. The crescent moon. It was the exact same shape as the birthmark on the back of Grace's neck. The pieces clicked into place with dizzying, sickening clarity. Grace was not just some random foundling. She was Caleb's daughter, and Nyara the Crow woman, who had warned him of danger, was her mother. Caleb hadn't abandoned his child. He had been trying to protect her. He had brought her to the cabin, the safest place he knew intending to. What, meet Astra and explain. Flee with his new family. And where was Nyara now? The ominous tone of her letter, combined with her and Caleb's disappearance, painted a grim picture. Astra's grief for the man she never knew was suddenly sharp and real. He wasn't a liar or a coward. He was a man caught in a dangerous situation, trying to do right by the woman he cared for and their child. Her anger at his deception evaporated, replaced by a deep, aching sorrow for their lost chance at a life together. The map was now a sacred text, the key to understanding everything. Nodina. The word meant nothing to her. A name, a place, a code. And what was at the X? What did the earth hold, as Nyara wrote, that was more than just stone? The next day, a new kind of determination settled over her. She would not let Silas Thornton, with his cold eyes and veiled threats, win. This land, this cabin, was not just a property claim anymore. It was Grace's birthright, a legacy from the parents she would never know. Her resolve was tested a few days later. She was out by the creek washing nappies with Grace, asleep in her cradle just inside the open cabin door. A shadow fell over her. She looked up to see Silas, sitting astride a fine black horse. "Still here, I see," he said, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "I admire your tenacity, Miss Bishop. Or perhaps I should call it foolishness. I'm not leaving. Mr. Thornton," Astra said, rising to her feet, her hands dripping with creek water. "My brother is gone," Silas said, dismounting and walking towards her. The sheriff's posse found nothing. The sensible thing to do would be to have him declared legally dead. As his only living relative, the homestead would then pass to me. "He has a child," Astra stated, her voice unwavering. "Grace. She is his heir, not you." Silas laughed, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "A nameless half-breed bastard left on his doorstep. You'll never prove it in a court of law. You have no papers, no witnesses. You have nothing but the ramblings of a desperate spinster." The insult stung, but Astra held her ground. "I have his letters. I have proof of his intentions. You have a stack of papers that I will happily burn with the rest of this hovel once you are gone," he said, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. He took another step closer, invading her space. "This is your last chance. I have a man in town, a banker who will handle the deed transfer. Take my offer. Go home. Forget you ever saw this miserable place. And if I don't..." His eyes glittered with malice. "This is wild country, Miss Bishop. Accidents happen. Fences break, livestock wanders off. Sometimes fires start all on their own. It would be a tragedy for a woman alone with a helpless babe to find herself without a roof over her head as winter approaches." It was a clear, unmistakable threat. Astra's heart hammered against her ribs, but she met his gaze without flinching. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Thornton? I am advising you, Miss Bishop. For your own good." He smiled that cold, dead smile again, turned on his heel, mounted his horse, and rode away, leaving the scent of menace hanging in the air. Astra stood trembling not from fear, but from rage. He had all but admitted his intentions. He wanted the land, and he would do anything to get it. He had likely hounded Caleb about it, just as Nyara's letter had suggested. She looked from the retreating figure of Silas to the cabin, and then to the hills where Caleb's claim lay hidden. The map in the wooden box was no longer just a clue. It was a weapon. Whatever secret Caleb and Nyara had been protecting, whatever was marked by that X, it was the one thing Silas truly wanted. And it was the one thing she would die to protect for the child sleeping peacefully in the cabin. Her child. Grace, the threat from Silas was not idle. It began subtly. A few days after his visit, Astra woke to find the gate to the small corral swinging open, the rope cut clean through. The mule Caleb had left behind, her only means of hauling heavy supplies from town, was gone. She spent half a day tracking the animal, finding it 3 miles downstream, thankfully uninjured. It was a message: you are vulnerable. A week later, it was the water barrel. She found the spigot, loosened the precious water collected from the creek, drained into the dust. It meant another back-breaking trip, with 2 heavy buckets Grace strapped to her chest in a makeshift sling. Each incident was small, deniable, but they accumulated into a constant low-grade terror. She felt watched. The rustle of leaves, the snap of a twig in the woods, every sound was a potential threat. Sleep became a luxury. She took to barring the door at night with the heavy table, the loaded shotgun always within arm's reach. Her isolation, once a source of peace, was now a suffocating liability. Her only contact with the outside world was Martha Higgins. When Astra walked to town for supplies, her face drawn and tight, Martha's sharp eyes missed nothing. "You look like you've seen a ghost, child," the storekeeper said, weighing out a bag of flour. "Just tired," Astra lied. To admit her fear felt like giving Silas a victory. "It's him, isn't it?" Martha lowered her voice, leaning over the counter. "Silas. He's a snake, that one. Always was. Even as a boy, he had a cruel streak. His father, Old Man Thornton, left everything to Caleb. Said Silas had a black hole where his heart should be. Silas never forgave either of them for it. This revelation was a crucial piece of the puzzle. It wasn't just about the claim. It was about a deep, festering resentment. Silas believed this land was his by right, and he viewed Caleb and now Astra and Grace as usurpers. Sheriff Brody says there's nothing he can do without proof. Astra said, the frustration evident in her voice. A cut rope isn't an arrestable offense. Brody's a good man, but he's cautious. Martha conceded. He needs more than suspicion to go up against a man with money and connections like Silas. She paused, her expression turning serious. There's talk in town. Silas has been seen riding with some hard cases. Men from the Blackwood gang. Claim jumpers and cutthroats, the lot of them. Their leader is a man named Jedediah Kane. He's as mean as a rattler and twice as fast. Jedediah Kane. The name chilled Astra to the bone. These were the men who watch from the ridge that Nyara had written about. This was no longer just a family dispute. Silas had allied himself with dangerous outlaws. Why, Astra asked, her mind racing. What's on that claim that's so important they'd bring in men like that? Martha shrugged. Folks say it's nothing, just a worthless piece of rock. But Caleb was a smart boy. He studied geology, read books. Maybe he saw something everyone else missed. Astra knew she had to act. Brody might need more than suspicion, but she had more. She had the map. She had the tiny moccasin. She had Nyara's letter. That evening, after putting Grace to bed, she made a decision. She couldn't go to the claim herself, it was too dangerous, and she couldn't leave the baby. But she had to tell Brody everything. The next morning, she walked into the sheriff's office, the wooden box tucked under her arm. She laid out the contents on his desk. The letters, the map, the beaded moccasin. She told him everything about Nyara. The birthmark, her belief that Grace was Caleb's daughter. Brody listened intently, his fingers tracing the drawing on the map. He picked up the tiny moccasin, his expression grim. "This changes things," he said, his voice low. "This isn't just a missing person case anymore. It's starting to look like murder." He looked up at her, his blue eyes full of a new concern. "And you and the child are right in the middle of it." "What is Nodina?" Astra asked, pointing to the word on the map. "It's not a word I know," Brody admitted, "but it could be Crow. There's an old prospector lives in a shack up in the hills. Name's Barnaby Finch. Trades with the Crow, speaks a little of their language. If anyone knows what it means, it's him. He's a bit touched, but he sees more than most folks." And Jedediah Kane, Brody's jaw tightened. "Kane is poison. If he's involved, Silas isn't just trying to scare you. He's playing for keeps. They think you're just a helpless woman who will run at the first sign of real trouble. They're underestimating you." He looked at her, a newfound respect in his eyes. "But they won't stop. Their next move will be bolder." His words were prophetic. The very next evening, as dusk was settling, the real terror came. Astra was humming a lullaby to Grace when she heard a low guttural sound from outside. It was a sound of pain. She grabbed the shotgun and peered through a crack in the door. In the twilight, she saw him. The mule. It was staggering in the corral, a feathered arrow protruding from its flank. It was a cruel, vicious act, meant not just to disable her, but to terrorize her. As she watched in horror, the animal collapsed, its legs buckling beneath it. Rage, pure and undiluted, washed over her. This was the work of Cain's men, a message sent on Silas's behalf. They had crossed a line. They had brought bloodshed to her doorstep. Without thinking, she flung the door open and fired the shotgun into the air. The blast roared through the quiet evening, a deafening declaration of defiance. "Get off my land!" she screamed into the encroaching darkness, her voice raw with fury. "You cowards! Get off my land!" There was no response, but the echo of her shot rolling back from the hills. They were gone, but they had made their point. Shaking, she went back inside, barred the door, and sank to the floor, pulling Grace's cradle closer. She had been foolish to think she could handle this alone. Brody was right. They had underestimated her, but she had also underestimated their depravity. She knew what she had to do. She couldn't wait for Brody to find Barnaby Finch. She had to understand what was on that claim. The map was her only guide, the lightning-scarred pine, the only landmark. She had to find a way to get there, to uncover the secret that Caleb and Nyara had died to protect. It was no longer about survival. It was about justice. Justice for Caleb, for Nyara, and for the orphaned child sleeping soundly in her cradle, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. The dead mule was a declaration of war. Astra buried the poor creature herself, a grim, physically punishing task that hardened her resolve with every shovelful of earth. She could no longer afford to be reactive. She had to seize the initiative. She needed an ally, someone who could leave the cabin. The next day, she walked to town, not with fear, but with a cold, calculated purpose. She went straight to the general store. "Martha," she said without preamble, "I need you to get a message to Sheriff Brody. Tell him Silas Thornton is trying to kill me. Tell him I have proof of his motive and I'm going to find it." Martha's eyes went wide. "Child, what are you saying? There's no more time for whispers, Martha. The time for waiting is over. I also need you to do something for me. Something dangerous." Astra took a deep breath. "I need you to watch Grace, just for a few hours. I have to go to Caleb's claim." The older woman looked from Astra's steely eyes to the infant in her arms. She saw not hysteria, but the deadly seriousness of a cornered animal. After a long silence, she gave a single firm nod. "Bring her here. She'll be safe with me." Leaving Grace in Martha's capable hands was the hardest thing Astra had ever done. It felt like leaving a piece of her own soul behind. But as she walked out of town, heading towards the hills, she felt lighter, faster, unburdened. For the first time, she was not a mother protecting her child. She was an avenger seeking justice for her child's parents. She had the map memorized. The terrain grew rougher as she ascended the path, giving way to game trails and rocky outcrops. The air grew thinner, cooler. After nearly 2 hours of climbing, she saw it a towering pine. Its upper branches blackened and skeletal a survivor of a long-ago lightning strike. It was exactly as Caleb had drawn it. Using the tree as her reference point, she found the spot marked with the X. It looked like nothing, just a jumble of rocks and overgrown brush at the base of a small cliff face. It was the last place anyone would think to look for anything of value. She remembered Nyara's words. He saw something everyone else missed. She began to search her hands, running over the rocks, pushing aside thorny bushes. Her fingers brushed against something that wasn't rock. It was wood. Frantically, she tore at the brush, revealing a small, cleverly hidden wooden door, its surface camouflaged with dirt and lichen. It was an entrance to an old abandoned prospecting tunnel barely large enough for a man to crawl into. Her heart hammered. This was it. She pulled the door open. The air that wafted out was cool and smelled of damp earth and something else. Something metallic. Steeling herself, she crawled inside. The tunnel was short, no more than 20 feet long. At the end it opened into a small, natural cavern. And there, in the dim light filtering from the entrance, she saw it. The walls of the cavern were not stone. They glittered and gleamed with a soft, yellowish light. A thick, unmistakable vein of gold, wider than her two hands clasped together, ran through the rock. It wasn't a simple claim. It was a king's ransom. A mother-lode. But that was not all she found. In the corner of the cavern, a small space had been cleared. A bedroll, a water canteen, and a small leather-bound journal lay there. It was Caleb's. With trembling hands she opened it. The last entries told the whole story. He and Nyara had discovered the hidden cavern by accident. Knowing a find this large would bring every killer and claim jumper in the territory down on them, they had decided to keep it secret. Caleb planned to file a minimal legal claim on the worthless surrounding rock, then slowly and secretly extract the gold over years. He sent for Astra, hoping to create the perfect cover. A simple homesteader with a new wife, a man with no reason to be suspected of harboring such a wealth. But Silas, during his visit, had grown suspicious of Caleb's secrecy and his friendship with Nyara. He'd hired Jedediah Kane and his gang to watch Caleb to find out what he was hiding. The journal's final desperate entry was scrawled in haste. Kane's men found the tunnel. Nyara came to warn me. They followed her. She told me to run to take the baby our Nodina, and run. She was going to lead them away, double back, but I hear shouting. A gunshot. Oh God, Nyara, I have to hide Nodina, my grace. I'll take her to the cabin. You Astra, if you are reading this, this is all for her. The gold, the land, it is her birthright. Do not let Silas take it. Nodina. It wasn't a place. It was a name. Her crow name. Her secret name. My grace. He had named her too. Tears streamed down Astra's face, dripping onto the journal's pages. The grief was immense, a physical weight. Caleb and Nyara hadn't just been killed for gold. They had died trying to protect each other and their daughter. A noise from the tunnel entrance made her freeze. A man's voice. I told you Kane was spooked for nothing. Ain't nobody been up here. Another voice, colder and sharper, replied. He said search everywhere. Silas wants to know what his brother was hiding before we take the land for good. Astra's blood turned to ice. It was Kane's men. She was trapped. The small cavern offered nowhere to hide. She grabbed the only thing she could think of, Caleb's heavy pickaxe leaning against the wall. She flattened herself into the deepest shadow of the cavern, her heart feeling as if it would explode from her chest. 2 men crawled into the cavern, their faces brutal and greedy in the gloom. Their eyes widened as they saw the vein of gold. "Sweet mother of—" the first one breathed. "We're rich." "Silas never said nothing about this," the second one growled. "This is ours now." It was in that moment of greed-fueled distraction that Astra moved. With a cry born of rage and desperation, she swung the pickaxe with all her might, not at the men, but at the timber support beam near the tunnel entrance, a beam Caleb had noted in his journal as being dangerously rotten. The heavy iron head struck the wood with a sickening crack. The beam splintered, and with a deep groan, the earth above it gave way. Rocks and dirt poured down, sealing the tunnel entrance in a cascade of debris. The 2 men were plunged into darkness, with her swearing and shouting in terror. "What did you do?" one of them screamed. "I just buried us alive," Astra said, her voice shaking but steady from the far side of the cavern. Panic erupted. The men scrambled towards the collapsed entrance, clawing uselessly at the tightly packed earth. Their bravado evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of being buried in a tomb of their own making. Outside, the landslide had been heard. Sheriff Brody, alerted by Martha and already riding with 2 deputies toward the claim, saw the dust cloud and spurred his horse. He found the collapsed tunnel entrance and a set of fresh tracks, 2 men in no one out. And then he saw her, Astra emerging from a small secondary air shaft on the other side of the cliff face, another secret noted in Caleb's journal. She was covered in dirt, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes burned with a triumphant fire. "They're in there," she gasped, handing Brody the journal. "Silas hired Cain to kill his brother. The gold is the proof." The story came together quickly after that. Trapped and terrified, the 2 thugs confessed everything to Brody in exchange for being dug out. They implicated Cain, and most importantly, Silas Thornton. They confirmed that Cain had killed Nyara, and that Caleb, ambushed days later near his cabin, had been shot and his body dumped in a ravine. Brody deputized half the town. They rode on Silas's rented room at the boarding house, the journal in Brody's hand serving as a warrant. Astra was there when they brought him out. She stood across the street, holding Grace tightly, her face a mask of cold fury. Silas saw her. His composure finally broke. The mask of the refined gentleman fell away, revealing the snarling, hate-filled man beneath. "You!" he shrieked, struggling against the deputy's grip. "You interfering bitch! That was my land, my gold. It was all mine." His confession, screamed for the whole town to hear, sealed his fate. He would hang. Jedediah Cain and the rest of his gang were hunted down over the next month, their reign of terror ended by the truth Astra had unearthed. The gold, legally, was Grace's. Sheriff Brody acting as the executor of the newly discovered will. He found in Caleb's journal, placed the mine in a trust to be managed by Martha Higgins and himself until Grace came of age. It would make her one of the wealthiest women in the territory. But for Astra, the gold was secondary. Her victory was standing on the porch of the cabin, her cabin now, with Grace cooing in her arms. She had finished the porch roof herself. The house was no longer a symbol of abandonment, but a testament to resilience. She had arrived seeking a life someone else would provide. Instead, she had built one herself, forged in loss, fear, and an unyielding love for a child who was not born of her body, but was unequivocally of her heart. The West had not given her the life she expected, but it had given her something far more valuable herself. Astra Bishop's story, is a powerful testament to the fact that family is not always about the blood you share, but about the love you fight to protect. She arrived in the West as a mail-order bride seeking a husband, but found her true calling as a mother, a survivor, and a warrior. Her journey, filled with heartbreak and betrayal, ultimately proves that the most valuable treasures are not gold buried in the earth, but the courage and resilience found within the human heart. If Astra's incredible story of strength and found family moved you, please give this video a like to show your support. Share it with someone who appreciates tales of true grit, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about the forgotten heroes of the Wild West. Let us know in the comments what part of Astra's journey resonated with you the most.